the most entrepreneurial generation we've ever experienced, facing the biggest crisis of our lifetime. Like, why do we just use these general terms? Something about being a pirate is kind of cool. I think this generation needs to aim for nothing less, but they're not going to get there by following the rules. I think pirates, I've heard pirates used lots by entrepreneurs. The famous Steve Jobs line I quote in the book and spoke about yesterday, I'd rather be a pirate than join the Navy, has always had a spirit of the rebel, which I think speaks to the entrepreneur. It has a spirit of going against the grain, which I think speaks to the entrepreneur. And I've used it myself many times, but I never really asked why. I started to research pirates, and I discovered a story that does not get told at all, of sophistication and accountability, of a group of young people standing up against authority and a self-interested establishment, a story of change, a story of new sets of rules, a story of fairness and equality, a story of justice, a story that belongs somewhere in the history and trajectory between the fight for workers' rights and civil rights. And I was completely amazed that it existed, and surprised that that story isn't told, and it feels to me exactly where this generation are at. Classically, an entrepreneur is somebody who creates an idea and takes it into some kind of business model. But I think there's something even more interesting happening around that term. I'm really interested in kind of the hustle generation, or the DIY generation, or the idea of the side hustle. And there are young people the world over who might have a job or be students, but on the side, they've got a plan about some app they're building, or a store, or some t-shirt brand, or whatever it is. And they can be a CEO, a student, have a part-time job, all at the same time. And that is going on the world over. And it's obviously given rise to by the advances of technology, which means that young people can be self-educated, self-manufacturing, self-publishing, in pretty much any country in the world. And do that in their evenings, leaving more traditional pursuits in the days. And rarely, all those that I meet that are involved in this kind of multi-hyphen career, as Emma Gannon puts it in her great book on the same topic, rarely do they use the term entrepreneur. So I think the most interesting things happen in entrepreneurship are happening outside of what we term entrepreneur. And they wouldn't yet call themselves entrepreneur, or they're too early, or their idea is nascent, or perhaps it's a bit political or artistic. And so we have this narrow classic view of entrepreneur, and I think the most interesting things are taking place on the outside. And I think that as this generation evolves, the next generation that come through, being entrepreneurial will just be a natural part of youth. I think the question is nicely put, but the truth is that if you're being an entrepreneur, then there's always failure. It's not sometimes, it's always. It's par for the course, and it's a necessary part of it. And as long as you, I remember being given these 3 rules of failure. As long as you understand who's accountable, and what led to it, you understand your role in it, like how much of it was your fault, and are you going to do it again? And then you share what you've learned. If you always do those 3 things, then there is no failure. Then it really becomes just a lesson on the journey. And that doesn't make it feel okay when you do it. It feels terrible when you actually do it, but nonetheless. So then, yes, and I just had this conversation with some of the really smart young people that I've met at this conference, and there's a lot of that conversation. The woman who was just talking to. Yeah. She has a very safe and secure job. She's frustrated. She knows she's not progressing, and she's got this idea. So, how do you know when to take the jump, right? And lots of us deal with that a lot of the time. So I think there's really 2 answers to it. One is now or never. There's only 2 good times to plant a tree. One is 100 years ago, and the other is now. And most of us, when faced with really difficult circumstances or faced with pressure, perform our absolute best. So if you really want to make it work, then put yourself in the frame. Don't take it easy. It's going to be difficult. And the point about being scared, my experience, and I only worked this out a couple of years ago, because I'm very scared, very nervous. I really, even yesterday's talk, I've had lots of nice feedback, but I was so anxious, I was sweating. And what I've worked out is that it takes much less energy to be brave than it does to be scared. You know, but if you're scared, it takes up all your time and you can't sleep and it just goes on and on. And if you just decide, fuck it, I'm going to be brave and do it, actually it's much easier to be brave than we think. It's much more difficult being scared. You know, if I had an idea for a business now, I would go away this weekend and I would make a Squarespace website that made it look like I've got the idea, and I'd come to an event like this and I'd show as many people as I could on my phone, would you like to buy this? And as soon as I've got 10 people buying it from me, great, I've got a business. I've not got the thing. I haven't made the idea. I haven't made the product. I could have drawn it on a piece of paper and said, would you buy this thing for 10 euros if I can deliver it next week? And then I know I've got customers. And then you become the income that I need. And on the back of that, I make the product. And then I use the cash from the business. And then I grow the business myself. I'm predicated to that because that's how I've grown my businesses. And when I see investors put small sums of money and get large returns from small guys at the very beginning of their journey, often I look at them and think, you could have just started this yourself. I think creativity is in everything. And I think there's a danger of over-worshipping the creative part of things. You know, you need when you're doing your accounts and your finances, you need to be creative. You know, how are you going to make this €100 stretch 2 weeks? How are you going to create new contracts that will give you the best deal possible? You need to be creative when you're dealing with people. You know, you've got these low motivated people and you're facing a really hard time. So how are you going to lift them up? What are you going to do around this? Sometimes I think we think creative is just in the space of like the Steve Jobs or the genius in the corner. It's not at all. It's in everybody, and everybody has a great capacity for creativity. And the role of creativity and the role of any entrepreneur is to unlock creativity in every aspect of your business. You know, it's an energy, it's a life force. It will mean that people want to stay with you longer, more. The best talent is going to come to you if it feels like a creative place. But never think it's just in the obvious forms of the idea itself or the people making the visual work. It's in every single part of the business and every single part of the team, and it always needs to be. Especially with all the technology we have now, I think the biggest challenge for any entrepreneur is focus. The mission I think I'm on and have been on for 20 years is about change.